First steps on the path. The first dawn in the Eternal Nexus Sect came too soon. A gong rolled through the compound, deep and resonant, as if a giant palm had set the air itself trembling. Liang snapped awake on the narrow bed with a gasp stuck halfway between sleep and alarm. For a few long breaths he did not know where he was. He saw threads that ran like silver veins through darkness and the flutter of a small body beating wings against a sky that spiraled. Then the room flowed back into place, wood and clay, and the small lamp sputtered to an ember. The whisper of the sparrow faded, yet it left a taste in his mouth like copper and smoke. The spiral in his chest pulsed once in slow approval or warning. He could not tell. He swung his feet to the floor and stood carefully. Every rib protested. His palms ached in a line from heel to knuckle. He dressed in the plain blue robes folded at the foot of the bed. The cloth rasped against raw skin. It bore a small spiral at the sleeve. It was as humble as any garment on the grounds, yet to him it felt like a contract signed in breath. He slipped the jade token into his sleeve and stepped into the corridor. The passage already hummed with life. Doors thudded. Sandaled feet whispered over stone. Voices ran together in a low stream as outer disciples moved toward the central courtyard. Liang joined their current. Some were still soft with youth, faces open, eyes wide. Some had the weathered look of those who had already worked half a life before setting foot inside these walls. A few carried old wounds in the way they set their shoulders. A few carried new ones and hid them poorly. No one paused to ask names. The gong sounded again and the air seemed to tighten with purpose. The training grounds opened like a plaza at the heart of the sect. Stone worn smooth by generations of feet held the light of morning. Tall pines encircled the court and let their needles fall in a whisper that sounded like the breath of an old man asleep. At the center stood an instructor in darker robes, a man whose shoulders looked as if they had been carved with a chisel. His voice cut across the space with the clean edge of a blade. Outer disciples, form lines. The chatter died the way rain stops when a wind changes. The crowd poured itself into rows that straightened as if a string had been pulled tight. Liang took his place at the end of the last line. He made his stance as he had been taught in other places, knees soft, back long, chest open. The instructor's gaze traveled down the rows and paused on Liang just long enough to make the skin between his shoulders prickle. The man did not speak. My name is Instructor Cai. I do not care from what village you ran, what oath you swore, what river you crossed, nor what mark you bear on your flesh. Here you are nothing until your body and your breath say otherwise. You will sweat. You will bleed. You will suffer without audience. If you cannot endure, the gates remember how to open. Walk through them and save us both time. No one moved. Liang felt the way a group can decide without speaking. It filled the air like the smell of rain. Good. Then we begin. The drills were simple to the eye. Stances that asked the legs to grow roots. Stretches that pried open the locks of hips and shoulders. Breathing that asked the body to remember what it had always known. Yet simplicity did not mean ease. Liang's ribs protested the expansion of his lungs. The climb and the fight and the long walk had written lines of heat under his skin that would not be erased by one night of sleep. He set his feet and bent and straightened and held until sweat ran down the channel of his spine and soaked his belt. The others moved to a rhythm that seemed to belong to the court rather than to any single man. Steps landed together. Palms lifted and returned as if a tide had decided they were waves. Liang's stance wobbled. He corrected late. His arms shook. His breath caught at the top and stuttered on the way out. The spiral in his chest picked that moment to stir. For an instant a handful of futures flickered at the edges of sight. He saw himself sink to a knee and heard the quiet that would follow. He saw himself push too far and tear what needed days to knit. He saw himself adjust one finger and hold. The visions did not last a full breath. They were enough. He rolled the weight a hair's breadth through the ball of his foot and felt the stance catch and steady. He slid air in again. He made it leave his body in a slow line. The tremble eased. Hold it. Cai's voice cracked the morning. He moved among the rows without hurry. When a back rounded he tapped it with his staff. When a knee locked he set a hand on it until the joint remembered how to bend. When a hand stood stiff he slapped the palm and the fingers fell into life again. He stopped in front of Liang and the world narrowed. You. New blood. Liang set his jaw to hide the shake in his legs and met the man's eyes without challenge and without lowering his gaze. Your stance is a stool with two legs. Your breath is a fish in a net. Do you think the spiral sewn into your flesh excuses a body that does not listen? No, instructor. Then prove your no. 50 strikes at the post. Cai angled his staff toward a row of wooden pillars set along the court's edge. Their surfaces were furred with the scars of other mornings. Liang stepped out of the line. He stood before a post that showed knuckle marks in 1,000 heights and widths. He set his feet as he had been taught, one heel in a straight line behind the other. He lifted his hands. He struck. Pain leapt through his knuckles as if a spark had run along a wire. He let the shock travel up the arm and into the shoulder and into the back so that it had a path and not a wall. He struck again. The post did not care about his story. It cared only about where bones met wood. The spiral stirred. It offered him glances of what might be. Hands split. Bones bruised and swollen. Hands that hardened the way clay hardens under calm fire. He could choose to strike lightly and keep the skin almost whole and gain nothing. He could choose to strike blindly and earn a useless injury. He could place the fist with care, feel the line from heel to knuckle, and let the post teach. He chose and chose again. At 30 his skin tore in small bright mouths. He could feel the beat of blood where it opened. He did not stop. At 40 his breath tried to hide inside his throat. He made it come and go obedient as a trained animal. At 50 the wood wore a sheen of red and his arms shook with the effort of stillness as much as with the effort of motion. He stepped back. He bowed to the post without thinking and turned. Cai looked at the blood and at the way Liang stood and not at his face. Good. Pain is the first teacher because it does not lie. Remember the lesson so that the second and third can teach other things. Training rolled forward until the sun had climbed and set a white coin in the sky. They drilled steps that asked the feet to argue with the ground and lose graciously. They learned to turn the hips as if a door swung on a hinge that never rusted. They stood holding one position while time stretched thin. When at last Cai cut the air with a gesture, the release felt like a gift handed without warning. Liang bowed with the others and stepped into the thin shade at the edge of the court. His hands throbbed. His arms felt carved from a wood that had not yet learned how to bend. He lifted his palms and saw the small rents, the shine of salve that would be needed, the promise that skin can toughen without becoming stone. Not bad, for a newcomer. The voice came dry as old paper. Liang turned. A boy his own age stood a few paces away. His eyes were sharp and narrow at the corners. His mouth curved in a way that acted like a smile while doing another kind of work. His robe was the same as Liang's. The way he held his shoulders made something in Liang's spine want to straighten, as if the boy had hooked invisible fingers under the posture of everyone near him. A small group of disciples drifted behind him like leaves that have agreed with a stream. You hit the post like a farmer chopping wood, the boy said. Perhaps the elder saw pity and mistook it for promise. Liang tasted the reply that rose. He did not speak it. He let it dissolve and his jaw tightened on the salt of it. The boy stepped close enough that his breath touched Liang's cheek. I am Zhao Ren. Remember it? I will be certain you never forget your place. The followers smiled as if the words had fed them. One brushed Liang's shoulder in a shove that was not a shove, too light to name and too deliberate to ignore. The spiral in Liang's chest brightened like an ember when wind touches it. Threads presented themselves the way a hawker presents goods in a crowded lane. He saw himself speak and watched the way words could turn a crowd from audience to mob. He saw himself step back and keep his teeth and let the boy believe that the step had been taken out of fear. He saw himself bow his head and let time work. He closed his eyes and breathed once. He opened them and turned away. For now. Zhao Ren's laugh followed him into the shade. It had the quality of a pebble dropped into an empty bowl. The sound remained after the bowl wanted it to leave. A bell rang for midday food and the court began to empty. Liang let the others go before him. He walked toward the hall where steam rose from pots and voices thickened with talk. The smell of rice and greens and broth stirred a hunger that felt personal rather than grand. A boy who carried a stack of wooden bowls looked up and grinned. Soon again. He handed Liang a bowl without being asked and slid an extra ladle of greens as if his hand had slipped. Liang nodded thanks and ate standing at a long table under the eaves. Conversation flowed around him. He caught words and let them go. Names of instructors. Names of drills. The gossip of small wars and small alliances. None of it took root in him. He did not yet know where to plant it. Afternoon brought a period of meditation that began to feel like more work than the forms. The instructor drew a spiral in sand with a stick. The line reached its middle and then widened again. Choice, he said, will try to make a kingdom in your chest. Let it pay rent. Breathe. Do not chase visions. Do not run from them. Sit. Liang sat. His back complained. His ribs sang. The spiral warmed. Threads lifted and fell like fish beneath the river surface. He let them pass. He did not lean on them. The stick brushed the sand and erased the line. The instructor made no speech to mark the moment. The silence taught what it had come to teach. When the light leaned toward evening, he turned his feet toward the library. He had never seen such a hall. Carved wood reached up and up until the ceiling became a suggestion held in shadow, its panels painted with stars and small strokes of gold. Scrolls slept in racks with small spirals burned into their spines. Lamps set in alcoves gave honey light to readers who sat cross-legged with the stillness of people who had forgotten their legs had purpose other than holding their bodies quiet. The librarian looked up. He was thin enough that his robe hung on him like a curtain. His eyes were clouded yet somehow precise. Jade token, he said. Liang set the token on the table. The man nodded once. Outer disciple. First shelf on the right, third row from the bottom. Start with what others have started with. Do not pretend to appetite you do not yet have. You may return to the questions that taste bitter after you have learned how to chew. Liang bowed and did as he was told. On the nature of Qi lay where the librarian had promised. He unrolled it and found a hand that had loved clarity. The writer spoke of breath as a traveler and of meridians as roads and of hardships that teach the traveler to step with care. The words were half poetry and half map. He read about the Danshan as a pool that could be fed and tapped without being drained if one learned where the springs lay. He read of viscous and swift Qi, of how intention shapes flow as surely as a channel shapes water. The concepts never outran their metaphors. They sat and waited until his mind arrived. He read until the lamps dimmed a little and the librarian rose to trim a wick. He did not notice time until the letters began to slide against one another. He set the scroll back in its bed and found another. It was short and offered a caution. Do not confuse power with health. Do not confuse health with virtue. Do not confuse virtue with fate. Take care of the first. Guard the second. Practice the third. Leave the fourth to the mountain. When he left the library, night had drawn a soft net over the courtyards. Torches pricked the dark along walkways. A pair of inner disciples stood under a pine and argued in a careful voice about the meaning of a phrase. Somewhere a flute tested a line and then set it aside. Liang walked back to his room. His hands ached with an honest ache. His pride still burned in the place Zhao Ren's laugh had touched, but it burned smaller now and no longer tried to warm his whole body by itself. The window was a square of silver. The sparrow sat on the sill. Its feathers carried threads of light that did not belong to the moon. Its eyes held him with the same too steady attention as before. "You again," he said quietly. The bird tilted its head as if the angle would fit his question into a shape it could carry. Its small body seemed very ordinary. He could see the rise and fall as it breathed. He could see the neat claws and the soft belly. He felt the wrongness of speaking to a bird as if it understood, and the equal wrongness of not speaking. "Do you mock me?" He kept his voice low so that the words would not feel like a challenge to an empty room. His hands throbbed. His ribs throbbed in a slower rhythm. Zhao Ren's promise padded down the hall of his memory with soft feet. "Do you watch to see me fail? Is that your work?" The sparrow made a single sound. In his mind the whisper that had followed him from the valley returned without chart or explanation. "Every choice devours the rest." Liang closed his fists and felt the bandage give a little under the pressure. "I hear you," he said. "Then I choose to endure. I will carve my path. If choices demand a price, I will spend breath and time and pain, not the lives of others. If the mark drags, I will learn to walk without letting it walk me. If pride speaks, I will answer it with work. If fear speaks, I will answer it with work. If hope speaks, I will answer it with work." The sparrow's feathers lifted and settled as if a breeze had passed through a space with no wind. For an instant the silver in the plumage shivered and then stilled. The bird stepped to the edge of the sill and dropped into the night with a small sound, a note the ear could not quite hold. Liang sat on the bed. He took the loop of knots from his sleeve and set it in his palm. He slid one knot as he breathed in. He slid another as he let the breath go. The spiral in his chest warmed. It did not rise into bright heat. It did not writhe with visions. It was a hearth coal and not a fire. He let the day settle around it. He saw Instructor Cai's careful cruelty and careful mercy. He saw the row of posts and the way the wood had accepted his blows without judgment. He saw Zhao Ren's face and found the shape of the boy's fear inside the shape of his arrogance and did not know yet what to do with that knowledge. He saw Archivist Shen's hands stained with ink and the small box with the cord and the patient way he had asked Liang to read what he would not like. Sleep took him slowly. He dreamed of a court full of people who stood with their eyes closed while the ground beneath the stone moved like water. He dreamed of a wall that held back a sea that had no waves and yet beat upon the stone. He dreamed of Elder Mo drawing a circle on the floor and stepping into it and then out again and leaving no trace the eye could see. He dreamed of a small bird walking over the circle and leaving a print that glowed and reached toward his chest. He woke once in the deep part of the night and listened. The sect breathed. It sounded like 100 bodies counting together without a leader and finding the same number. The spiral in his chest gave one slow pulse as if to say remember, then lay quiet. When morning came again it would ask for the same things and for different ones. It would offer the same road and roads he had never walked. He would stand in the line and he would strike the post again and he would carry a book to a table and unroll it and see what another hand had left for him to learn. He would see Zhao Ren again. He would not let the boy own his breath. He would stand where the instructors set him to stand and move when it was time to move, and he would hold still when stillness asked more courage than stepping forward. Every choice devours the rest. The words did not frighten him as they had the day before. They did not comfort him either. They sat like a stone in his pocket. He would learn its weight by carrying it. He drew one long breath and let it out and lay down. The last thing he saw before sleep closed the room was the square of the window and the small slice of sky where a single star held on against the coming light.